So hi, welcome to Disrupt.
I'm very happy to be here. How are you?
Good. So you and I have known each other a long time.
Okay.
I first met you when you were like one of the people in this room. You had you were building a startup. You had no idea it was going to come out of stealth and it was going to be bought for over $1 billion.
Yeah.
But I remember you telling me back in those days that when you were in college or just before you, when you were getting your startup going, you kind of felt like a failure. Like you all the things that you thought you were going to do, you didn't wind up doing.
Yeah.
So my question is, like, looking back, now you're a really successful VC and you've had all this experience, you've worked for big tech,
Yeah.
but what is it that you wish you knew that you can impart some wisdom to the people sitting in the chair right now that are trying to get where you got?
You know, it's kind of funny. I mean, this is such an exception industry. You look back and there's very few lessons you can actually draw. Like as a VC, you speak in aphorisms, but there's very few actual simple one-liners that apply to startups. But there is one I think for me has been kind of a guiding principle, and I wish I would have known it sooner, which is Silicon Valley is so performative, right? There's a lot of like doing startups and doing the right stuff and being part of the culture club and doing networking and all of this stuff. And I don't think any of that really had a serious impact. I think the most important thing is just to do the thing. And there's kind of a corollary to that, which is the following, which is I think every cultural generation, there's this meme of people focusing on how they can be as productive as possible in a given day. And like, you know, they'd be like, okay, I'm gonna wake up at 5, and then, you know, I'm gonna like, whatever, eat something, and then run, and then work out, and then I'm gonna work this time, and I'm not gonna sleep a lot, and I'm gonna like fast, and whatever. And it happens consistently for the last 30 years. But in my experience with startups, I've done 2 companies, like startups are so hard. And you as a founder are so traumatized that I actually think you need to kind of do the opposite, which is like, if you just focus on like staying sane and taking care of yourself, and if that means like sleeping in and eating fast food, like that's totally fine. Because at the end of the day, these always take way longer than you expect. And I think the people that actually just focus on their well-beings are the ones that survive. And just a last coda on that. When I started my company in 2007, there's probably 5 competing companies that did kind of roughly the same thing. Could you tell them apart? I mean, they're all kind of competent and good. I mean, if you ask me why did we end up winning, I would say, honestly, you know, downturns are hard, 2008 downturn, and I think a lot of the times these companies just don't hold together, and so if you can survive, like, at the end of the day, you'll have a shot at winning. And so I would, listen, it's good to hear about all the hustle crazy stuff, and like, feel free to go ahead and think about that, but if you're doing a startup, you should really, really focus on your mental well-being.
So we're here to talk, at least for a little bit, about AI governance.
Yeah.
This was a very hot topic for you over the summer.
Yeah.
You were tweet storming up a storm. You really, really disliked California's AI kill switch law.
Yeah.
The governor vetoed it. So, like, are we good now? Like, is AI governance not really a problem? Or are there things that you are still watching that you're worried about?
Maybe I should just try and like provide like some context on my position just to kind of level set here, which is
okay, fair enough.
Okay, listen, new epochs of technology require us to think about governance around that technology, right? So like, let's say for like the creation of the internet, it was like a new epoch of technology, and we did have to think about like, okay, so do we change and evolve our laws? And at the time of the internet, like, it was a new paradigm. You had new types of risks, right? You had like internet worms, and you had this notion of asymmetry, which meant like if you leaned into it, you were more vulnerable. And we went through all of that discourse, and we decided that there's a few precepts we're going to stick to. Like, we thought like open source is very important. We thought that engaging academia was very important. We thought about investing and being leaders were important. So the idea of like transformative technologies and regulation has been this ongoing discourse for decades, right? So the thing with all the AI discourse is it seems to have kind of come out of nowhere, out of whole cloth, where it just doesn't learn from a lot of the discussions that have been had over the last few decades, and they're kind of trying to conjure net new regulations without drawing from those lessons, right? And so that was the case with California SB 1047, which is the one I was probably way too vocal about. And
Maybe just vocal enough.
maybe, yeah, we'll see. I mean, like, but my conclusion through all of this is, if you're going to change the paradigm of how you do regulation, so we all should regulate. Regulation is very important. If you're going to change the paradigm, you have to have a notion of marginal risk that's different. Like, how is AI today different than someone using Google? How is AI today different than someone just using the internet? If we have a model for how it's different, you've got some notion of marginal risk, and then you can apply policies that address that marginal risk. But we don't have that today. So I think we're a little bit early before we're starting to like glom on a bunch of regulation to really understand what we're going to regulate. And again, we've been through this before with the internet, where we did have an understanding of marginal risk, and I think we did a good job on regulation. So anyways, so I think the good news with SB 1047 is that it forced a dialogue, and what a dialogue it was. And I think that academia, who had previously been silent, entered the discussion. And I think that one of the conclusions, and actually, if you look at, there's a proposal by Don Song, Ayan Stoica, these are professors at Berkeley, Fei-Fei Li at Stanford. They basically said, listen, the question of marginal risk is a research question. And we need to, from a policy standpoint, invest in research on marginal risk. And once we do that, we'll have a good notion of how to regulate. So we'll have evidence-based regulation, and I think that is absolutely the right conclusion. And so I think like VCs like myself should probably step out and let the academics take over.
For people in this room, though, who are actively building their companies right now,
Yeah.
they're the ones that are going to be caught in the crosshairs of regulation, and it's all being done with academics or high above them or in Washington or whatever.
Right.
So what is your advice to them, to your portfolio companies, about what they should be doing or watching right now?
Yeah, so, I mean, unfortunately, we're at a time where, like, this is just sailing. And, like, normally when you don't have, like, some big shift, you can just kind of focus on building or doing kind of whatever you're working on. Right now, like, this is just a very salient topic where people are very focused on, like, is AI going to come, and is it going to hurt us, and whatever. And so I think that you have to become part of the discourse, and I think you have to become part of the dialogue. And in particular, if there are voices that are policy experts that are telling you that this is going to be bad for the industry, you should understand what that is, and then hopefully you can become on the side of those that are actually doing the policy.
So pay attention. Pay attention to who's
get involved.
Who is saying what.
Yes.
Okay. So let's move on to another thing that you really feel strongly about.
Yeah.
And that is open source versus closed source AI.
Yeah.
You wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal in which you said, big tech has been feeding anti-open source messaging to defense and national security agencies to hoard the gains.
Yeah.
And during that article, you called out Microsoft by name. So what is Microsoft doing that has you so worried?
So listen, I actually don't know if Microsoft is a bad actor here. So I'll actually kind of pull a little bit away about that. But here's the reality. So, historically, open source has been a way to actually ensure you've got better security, right? Like, open source has been a way to ensure, like, academics and researchers engage. And right now, we're in this kind of strange period where a number of very vocal and very famous people in the industry are talking against open source, which has been actually, I can't think historically when this happened before, right? Like, so Vinod Khosla has been very, very vocal against it. Eric Schmidt has been very vocal against it. And these are people that have lauded open source in the past, right? And so I think there's a question we should be all be asking, which is, is this different? Is this a different time, therefore we should regulate open source? I think it's a valid question. Or is this like it's always been? Like, remember, the internet was this kind of scary place. We were talking to strangers, we had new types of worms, and yet we decided open source was the right outcome here. So I think we should ask the question, is it different? And that question is a technical question. It's a marginal risk technical question. And if you talk to the experts, they'll say, we don't know the answer to this. And so my view on the open source one is exactly what I said previously, is like we need to be investing in research and in academics to answer marginal risk. And before we go and kneecap an industry and kneecap our ability as, for example, a nation to stay ahead, we should answer this question. And again, like, I do think, listen, sometimes I swing a little bit too widely, right? And like I just go to whatever's easy, like, oh, it's like the big companies or whatever. I actually think many of the big companies are good actors in this case. I actually think that there is a subset of people that do believe that there's an existential risk or may have some other guidance that are actually leading this one. But I want to bring you back 20 years. Like, this is very new. But this whole thing is very new in the sense that in the past, when we had these emergent kind of scary technologies, everybody engaged actively. Like the startup ecosystem did, the academic ecosystem did. I mean, the forefront of EFF came out of like MIT, right? And so there was these kind of movements, and right now there's been relative silence from engineers, from builders, from founders, certainly silence from academics. And it's been largely carried by these kind of these minority voices that believe in kind of existential risk, and that's really kind of twisted the conversation. And so my goal is not, we shouldn't have regulation. My goal is to say, when it comes to open source, is saying, this is a valid question, let's ask the real question and have all the stakeholders in the room. And I think that's what's happening.
Boiling it down to the people in this room, though,
Yeah.
what does it mean for their technology choices? So, you know, are you saying don't just go with OpenAI, or, you know, make sure you always examine an open source model before you build your startup?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
how do they navigate it?
I mean, I do think that I think that these things are in flux and dynamic enough. I think it's very important that people here understand what's going on for their technology choices, but almost in the opposite, which is we could have export controls. Like, that could happen, right? Like, they are talking about this. We actually could have liability on models that could impact you in the next 2 years. Like, this was like very legitimately floated. You know, we could have restrictions on what you can do. And I wish I wasn't up here at a point where I had to say, you know, like, this is true, but like, I mean, SB 1047 almost got passed. It almost did. And that could have very easily created an opening so somebody could have sued you as a startup. You know, listen, whether valid or not and whether they would have won or not, in the court, if something happened based on software that you built. And that's a very new space to be in. And so I would say, rather than making technical choices now, I would get very educated on what's going on at the federal level. I'd get very educated on what's going on at the California level. And then I would make decisions based on that. There's another one that we haven't talked about yet, because we talked about open source and marginal risk, which is copyright. You know, like, this is probably, of all of them, going to be the biggest battle. And it's just incredibly unclear right now where it's going to land, right? I mean, if there's a generative AI company, it probably has a lawsuit currently for copyright. And this happens with the emergence of each of these kind of new waves, right? This happened during the early internet days, right? Remember, like, YouTube. Right? You know, like, I mean, it was totally loaded with lawsuits, you know, when it got acquired, and then Google had to fix it out. So I think you know, here's what I advise my startups. Make sure that you actually have a lawyer on close call that can actually provide guidance on this. Be very, very informed on what legislation is passing through. And often these discussions are not around this existential risk open source stuff, but it's on, like, understanding the copyright.
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 Okay, so we do have mics, and we are going to open this up to questions in about 5 minutes. So I'll let you know when it's time to line up for your questions.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to, the last time we talked, you had talked again about this AI supercycle in funding too. You said governance is on your mind, but this is one of the most extreme cycles you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so you like, how do builders navigate that? Like, especially if you're deep tech or your AI is only part of what you're doing, it's not really what you're doing.
Yeah, I think with these super cycles, the problem is there's just so much, like, confusion that it's hard to know what's actually working and when it's not working. Does this make sense? And so I think either, listen, like, super cycles don't obviate old cycles, right? Like, the internet didn't get rid of computers. It didn't compute. They normally actually accelerate it, right? So, like, just because there's AI doesn't mean you have to do AI to get funded, right? And in fact, I think the companies that end up getting killed in a super cycle, like, they don't do the thing that we know that works, and they don't do the AI native thing. They always do something kind of in between, kind of the AI wash it, or do they do AI hybrid or whatever, and it happens every cycle. Like, do you guys remember in the move to cloud, all the hybrid compute stuff? Like, that didn't work. Like, hybrid mobile, that didn't work. And so I think if you're in the space, either be very native and, like, understand why the super cycle exists, or, like, keep doing the traditional stuff because it tends to be buoyed on that. So I think it's worth actually saying, oh, so what actually works? So here's what we know about the AI cycle. So the way that I like to talk about it is like the marginal cost of something is going to zero. So for compute, the marginal cost of computing went to zero. Instead of, like, calculating logarithm tables by hand, you know, a computer did it about 10,000 times faster. You had the compute revolution. The internet, the marginal cost of distribution went to 0, so instead of like sending boxes, go over the internet, okay, we have the internet. So there's two things that we know work very, very well in the AI world, right? So the marginal cost of content creation is going to 0. And it tends to be content creation where there's no formal notion of correctness, right? So these are like images and videos and music and fiction. Like any company that's in those spaces is doing incredibly well. And not just incredibly well on growth, but I mean like revenue, profitability, efficiency, et cetera. So there's great. And we're just getting started on that. So that's definitely working. Language reasoning. We know that like one-shot language reasoning, the marginal cost is going to 0. That's definitely working, right? So like summarize an email, help me draft something, think through. So that's going to 0. This is always a funny one to talk about, but we've never been able to build computers that emote in a way that like humans find convincing. Like that's kind of never been a thing, but we've cracked that problem. So this notion of like emotional connection or companionship is definitely working. Now, from an investment standpoint, it's always a little bit dicey because it tends to like maybe abut with like not safe for work stuff or like, it tends to be very fragmented. But those companies work very, very well, right? And this is a new paradigm. Like this is a new user behavior. We don't know how to think about it.
Well, in the companionship stuff right now, teens are really into it and preteens are really into it. I think you had mentioned that your daughter and her crowd really loves character AI, and then there was that scary incident with a child ending his life in a lawsuit. So it feels like that is a particular area that's doing well, and also a particular area that maybe needs more governance.
100%. No, I totally agree. So just like with social networking, just like with the internet, the internet raised many, many questions of like, you're talking to strangers, like you're getting to know them, like et cetera. And like these are things that we've been grappling. We actually have a policy framework to deal with, and we 100% should apply it here. So the companionship is one, like this is a new user behavior. So a lot of companies, like they don't know how to build in this space, but if you take a native approach, the companies are working. Then of course, as we all know, code is working quite well, which is, kind of a more an emergent space. And now we're just moving into B2B, and we're a little bit early for that, but like I think it's quite easy to see, just like how the internet started as a consumer phenomenon and went to the enterprise, that the same thing is happening with AI.
So we're about to take questions. If you have questions, please start lining up we have someone very ready. I'm gonna ask one more question, and then it'll be your turn, okay? So one of the things that's on my mind a lot when I'm pitched AI companies all the time to write about is that what's to stop the big tech companies from swooping in and just making these products themselves? So if you're building on top of OpenAI, you're building on top of Microsoft or Google's cloud or any of them, Amazon's cloud even, what's to protect the little guy from these companies saying, oh, this is a great idea, I am just going to release this as a feature?
Yes, new companies really can't do new user behaviors. They just don't know how to do that, right? So, there's always been this question in AI, and this is like the question, going back 20 years, which is, it's this magical technology we've been talking about. This is before the generative stuff, and we've been talking about it, and clearly like Meta's making a bunch of money from it, and Google, so why haven't we seen disruption where like we had a whole wave of AI native startups? Like that's never happened, and it's always been this huge paradox in investing because we were like AI, but all of the money went to the incumbents, right? And the answer to that has been the economics suck, right? It's like it's a great way of optimizing existing things. Like I can, I can like target ads 10% better, right? I can convert you 20% more. But it's like then these kind of marginal gains that take a lot of money to do. So if you're a monopolistic incumbent, of course you can take advantage of that. But as a startup, you can't. Probably the number one thing of this generative wave is like that is different. Like the economics are phenomenal, right? Like if I were to like create an image of myself by drawing it, it would cost, what, $100 in an hour? Like the inference cost is of a fraction of a penny. So you have a dislocation in economics, and it's a new behavior. We just didn't have this behavior. And so incumbents just don't know how to go in like entirely new areas with economic dislocation. And this is why we're seeing companies that you would naturally think would be like in the domain of a Microsoft or a Meta or an OpenAI being quite successful right now. And so this is the wave if you want to go against the incumbents now, because you have all of the foundational properties in order to do that, which we just didn't have in the past.
Okay, so first question.
Hi, My name is Saeed. I'm a lawyer, so I'm a little biased about the question that I'm going to ask. But how do you think we can avoid the mistakes that happen, as you mentioned, like in the social media era, in terms of like move fast, break things, and then apologize later, and things are going to, fix themselves. But I think, as everyone admits, AI's impact is probably going to be a lot bigger than like social media, maybe comparable to internet. So I respectfully think that we don't have the luxury of just like delaying the regulation or the safety issues to a later time.
Right.
Right. And as
No,
we see, for example, like you have a huge impact on like choosing.
This is a great question. So I think a few things we should all agree on. There is a robust regulatory regime that exists in place today that's been developed over 30 years. Two, there is a regulatory regime. Two, whatever we do, if we got it wrong in social media, you can't fix it by putting it on AI, right? And like, by the way, one of the, I think, biggest kind of logical fallacies that happens from like the AI regulation people, they're like, oh, we got it wrong in like social, therefore we'll get it right in AI. I mean, which is, it's a nonsensical statement. Let's go fix it in social. So I think 100% we should have a broad dialogue that includes things like social media. And then we should say, if we didn't get it right in social media, let's get it right. And then B, if it's different, let's understand how it's different so we know we're regulating the right things. So I'll give you a very specific example where this line of reasoning I think is wrong, which is if you don't know where the marginal risk is, which we don't, and you create a policy based on that, you're probably not going to regulate what you want to regulate because it's going to be the wrong thing, which we actually saw with the executive order. And if you're worried about social networking, you've actually taken a lot of energy and effort and discussion away from that problem. So my answer to you is, if there's a problem with social media, let's focus on it. Let's include that as part of the AI problem, and then let's kind of work towards all of these. And if there's a marginal difference, let's figure out what that is, and then apply policy to it.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Reagan. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Align AI. So I'm in the AI governance space. For a long time, a lot of these companies, like in financial services, haven't been able to use like more black box models because you can't really determine why it's making that decision. From a regulatory ecosystem, I think the new wave of AI has an opportunity to apply some of these more complex topics and techniques to use cases in healthcare and financial services. Do you think there's an opportunity for the regulators to kind of rethink that paradigm and that process of having to understand exactly why models are making certain decisions?
Yeah, this one's always been a little, I think I would love to have a deeper conversation, which you can't have on this one, which is, so my formal studies, my PhD is in distributed systems and networking, and like you basically deal with non-determinism full time, and it's provably non-deterministic, and we've been building models that are non-deterministic, and we've been doing this for a very long time. I program with LLMs, as like, listen, this is kind of like foolish stuff that I do in the evening, and 100% they're non-deterministic, but they remind me a lot of like actually building kind of complex, distributed systems. And so I just think as computer scientists, we have tools to deal with a lot of this stuff. We've been dealing with black boxes for a long time. For sure, there are technical approaches that we need to apply to the problem. It's not clear to me that this is something at this point that you solve with regulation. Now, if it is, if there's a marginal difference from like dealing with something on the internet, which is totally non-deterministic, or a distributed system, which is totally non-deterministic, great. But let's specify exactly what that is and come up with a model so we know that we're applying regulation to the correct thing. But I think it's a totally legit question.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm a student at Stanford studying AI, and
Hey,
we learn about things like ethics and regulation in the classroom through some initiatives like embedded ethics. But I'm wondering do you think that there's more that needs to be done in the classroom surrounding learning about regulation of AI?
Yeah, so I would have to know what the current curriculum is. So in 2003, I actually co-taught, I know I'm old, yeah. I co-taught a course on cybersecurity policy, but with William Perry at Stanford. So I was doing my PhD at Stanford. And he was like the Secretary of Defense for the Clinton administration. And at that time, a lot of actual policy was done at MS&E. It was done in a totally different department. And the problem was they didn't have a good technical foundation for a lot of the policy, and then the technologists, which was us sitting in the Gates building, so this was in the computer science building, we just didn't have the policy background. So I don't have an answer of like, this should be part of the base curriculum for everybody? I don't know, maybe. But for sure, there should be collaboration between like computer science proper and policy proper to create formal models that you apply policy to, in particular these issues of marginal risk, which I just think is so important, and is something that we've just lost in this one, which we really had 20 years ago. Thanks for the question.
Which sort of helps answer the question from the lawyer, too. It's talk to more technologists.
Yeah, the problem is like, there's all these straw man arguments, which is like, oh, Martin is a VC, then he doesn't like regulation, which is like patently false, man. I've been doing regulation for 20 years. I think it's important. You just want to regulate the right stuff, right? Like, you want to like actually be principled when you think about these things.
Okay, next question.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking the time, Martin. My name is Ashton Joshi. I'm a freshman at Berkeley. I'm the youngest founder to get admitted to the Berkeley STEP Incubator, and my company has raised $100K pre-seed. So I'm asking, what advice would you give to an aspiring 18-year-old entrepreneur like myself? And I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I don't know. I honestly, I think startups are the long tailest of long tailest things, and the successes are all exceptions. And so it's so funny because we always come up with these simple bits of advice, and then if you actually look at the data, it never adheres to it. So here's one thing I will say. I hadn't a clue what I was doing when I did my startup. Like I knew like less than nothing. I was so naive. I didn't know what startups were. I didn't know what fundraising was. And I knew all of these other founders. They just knew it all. Like they went to like the meetups, and they knew the language, they knew the VCs, and they knew fundraising. At the end of the day, none of that mattered. You can learn everything that you need on the job, but you really must be a student of your specific startup. Because there's something very specific about a startup being an exception or a long tail thing, which is your success or failure will be in that tail. And that tail will be unique to your startup. So really, really become an expert in your field and an expert, like a student of that. The history of your space, like a specific way to do it, and you'll be fine. Do not look for mean understanding of starting startups. They'll most likely misguide you.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Mariana Bonecki. I run an early-stage venture capital fund that invests in AI startups. You mentioned before that AI technology, that's what I understood, that not much different if it comes to regulation. So we had regulation in place before, and that should be the same way. So that's a problem what I see here. AI technology is very different in my view, because it has three stakeholders as measured. It has government that's supposed to regulate it, but doesn't possess it. You have big corporations that have data and have technology to build it. And you have consumers on that data, the technologies are getting built. I worked on the Global AI Initiative in 2018.
Do you have a question?
Yes. And we, since that moment, didn't move in any direction. So what I see, there is a big need for a global AI initiative authority that takes it all under umbrella. So do you think we're going to go that direction one day, or will be the regulation more scattered?
God, I hope not. I mean, everything that you said applies to the internet, everything, right? And so if you're going to regulate AI and not the internet, I don't know what we're doing, right? Because the internet is something that everybody uses today and touches everything, and AI is still nascent. And so, listen, I really think a lot of like the angst around AI are exactly what you said. Like we feel like we got it wrong with the internet, so we're going to get it right now, but you can't get it right by just focusing on AI. So what I should say is, if we got it wrong for the internet, let's step back and get it right for the internet and use that as a foundation. All I want is like a sensible, cogent discussion on tech policy that takes a broad consideration. By the way, I just have to say this. Have you actually seen the definitions for AI in these policies? Like we can't even define it. It's literally like if you squint one way, it looks like Excel could be included, and you squint the other way, right? It doesn't apply to half of the things people call AI. So until we can even define it, like we're just making regulation off of vibes, which I don't think is the right way forward.
That's why it's important that startup founders, as we mentioned before, become part of these policies.
I 100% agree. Thank you.
Next question. This is the last question.
Hey, how are you doing? My name's Declan Dunn. I'm on an AI native platform called Amadeus, and I also run the AI Optimist podcast. And you brought up copyright and regulation, which seems to me is not only being like ignored, but fair use is being memified by everybody from Microsoft or anybody who basically doesn't want to pay for content. That's out the door. My question to you on copyright and this is just thoughts. Yeah. Everybody who says in AI when they're training, well, that's input. There's no copyright on input. Output, sure. That premise is so core to regulation. And I'm just curious, do you think input has no copyright protection since the output isn't exactly what was put in?
So listen, I am not a lawyer, but it seems to me this discussion reduces to exactly what you're asking, which is, if I take my daughter and I say, read these comics that are copyrighted, of course she's being trained on that. And if I say, okay, now draw a picture of Spider-Man, like, that would be copyrighted. So the question is, do you hold AI to the same standard or not? I mean, clearly when we do like traditional indexing, search indexing, we look at all this copyrighted stuff, we create derivative indexes, and it allows us to find it. Then if for inputs, if we do copyright on that, does that apply to traditional indexing? Here's my experience for what it's worth, kind of like a capstone comment on all of this, which is I'm old enough to have seen many of these epochs, and every epoch there's a copyright question, right? I remember peer-to-peer, I remember the early internet, I remember all the blog stuff, I remember the streaming stuff. And in my experience, when there's no legitimate business case, like the case with P2P, like copyright wins. Like basically, the P2P business case. This is back in like the late '90s, was like illegal music sharing. That's what it was, right? Let's just call it what it was. Anytime there's a legitimate business case, every single time we figure it out, and we figure it out because the content holders want to like find the new business and etc. So I am an optimist that we'll figure out the right thing for everybody, just like we did with music streaming, just like we did with video streaming. Just like we did with radio, just like we did with blogs. I think we'll figure it out. It's just going to be painful, and like we're all going to bellyache, and we should all be part of that process. But there is a viable business case this time. This is not illegal stuff we're doing. There's a viable business case, and so I'm optimistic.
So the upshot is, you're building AI companies. Pay attention to what they're saying. Pay attention to who is saying it.
Yeah.
And at any point that you can enter your voice, even if it's talking to your VCs,
Yes.
speak up.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the questions.